Retro.
Hi, this is Vanessa Marshall, voice of Hera and Rook Cast, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. Their behavior is continually unexpected.
Hello and welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithling.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And we are kicking off another week with a discussion of another episode of the Clone Wars as part of our rewatch. Jay, you want to go ahead and give everyone you want to go ahead and remind everybody what our social media contacts are before we get started?
You got it, Dennis. We're on Facebook and Instagram conveniently at Podcast Stardust.
All right, the dish is aligned, the signal is boosted to maximum output, the shield is down. We are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So we are looking at episode 21 from season 2. This is the penultimate episode of the season. It's called Artoo Come Home. It is the second of 3 episodes in the story arc that we started last week after Boba Fett infiltrated the Jedi cruiser in his attempt to get revenge on Mace Windu for killing Jango Fett. And just as an aside, the 3rd episode is one that we've already covered on this podcast. So I will be trying to release that as a bonus episode at some point in the future. So be on the lookout for that, but we're not going to re-record another episode on that. So anyways, with all that having been said, Jay, why don't you kick off our discussion by giving us the summary of the episode?
All right. When Anakin Skywalker and Mace Windu look for survivors from the Endurance's crash on Vancouver, they walk into a trap left by Boba Fett and Aurra Sing. Trapped under debris on the Endurance's bridge, Anakin and Mace are forced to hold out as long as possible while R2-D2 goes for help. The plucky little astromech successfully avoids Gundark's and Boba Fett's team of bounty hunters and makes it back to Coruscant and the Jedi just in time to rescue the trapped Jedi Knights.
Right. So I'm going to be frank. I like this episode, but if you're looking at the 3-episode arc that we're talking about here, I don't want to say it's the weakest of the 3. That doesn't mean it's a bad episode. For me, it just doesn't stand out the way that the others did by comparison. Plenty good episode. It really features R2-D2, makes him look like a hero, and I've got some other comparisons we'll draw here in a bit. But what did you think about this episode overall, Jay?
Oh, I loved it. I mean, R2-D2 in this is, as Dave Filoni puts it, the family dog. Mm-hmm. And it just really gives them an opportunity to shine and gets us back to the essence of who R2 is. I mean, it really feels very, very A New Hope in a lot of ways, but also adding those elements of all of the things that we've seen of R2 since then. And just allowing us, even a lot of the sound bites were classic R2-D2 sound bites. So it was also a great exploration into, I guess you could say, the attachment that Anakin has towards inanimate objects, such as R2-D2. And so I would love to explore that, but a lot of stuff going on in this one, actually.
Yeah. I was thinking about this episode after I watched it, and before I got to sit down and make my notes, and it was kind of like, this was the Star Wars version of Home Alone. When you've got
perfect,
yeah, because you've got R2-D2 has to fend off Gundarks and a trio of bounty hunters, and he's not really making the complicated traps that we got to see Macaulay Culkin make in Home Alone or anything like that, but he's dropping sheets of metal and boxes on top of the bounty hunters' heads. Then he finds a grenade and drops that on their head. And then he gets creative fighting the Gundarks, in a couple instances, getting away from them. It's just kind of like everything he can throw at them, he does. And I also like the family dog reference that Dave Filoni made in the featurette for this episode, just talking about, how you write R2-D2 and, he is the family dog, which is funny because later we know when they made Rebels, Dave went out of his way to say if R2 is the family dog, Chopper is the family cat.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
that came to mind here. Uh,
Mhm.
so one of the things about this episode, and you brought it up, it's, there's this special relationship between Anakin and R2D2. And I've said it a number of times, I'm a bit of a Mace Windu apologist, but from the beginning of this episode, Mace just doesn't get it and doesn't have the faith in R2D2. As far, to Mace, it's very much like droids are things, they're tools in all
Mhm.
of this. But what did you think of Mace and the way he looked at R2D2 in this episode?
Well, I think you hit it spot on. He sees these droids as tools. And we even got a very similar reaction. And we've talked about this before in an earlier episode with Obi-Wan talking about R2. Why do you care for that droid so much? It's just, we can't go back for him, Anakin. And so, time and time again, Anakin shows his affection and his, if you want to call it attachment, to R2D2. And Mace just doesn't get that. But I think a lot of that is also because the fact that Mace was brought up in the Jedi Temple, and Anakin, I mean, when he was on Tatooine, he working for Watto, he built C-3PO. He even talks about in the novelization for Revenge of the Sith that one of the reasons that he built C-3PO was because he was lonely.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's a different dynamic that Anakin has and a different type of trust level. And eventually, obviously, Mace warms up to that. And it's just a whole different way of thinking, I think, for Mace, that he just doesn't understand it. And he sees that there is a meaningful relationship between Anakin and R2. And even at the end, when he gives him that little, well done, droid, it was sort of a secondhand compliment to Anakin as well, being R2's owner.
Yeah, I think you put it very well there. I mean, Anakin met R2D2 while they were part of the whole controversy happening on Naboo. And then those two flew into battle together. Anakin's very first space battle, R2D2 was his droid sitting there in the astromech slot of the
Mhm.
M1 starfighter that he's in there. So these two go way back. They have a history. And Anakin even says that, I can't remember exactly what he says, but it's like, R2 is a bit quirky, a little different than the average astromech because he never had his mind erased here, and
Mhm.
we've found out from other sources that that's what happens with astromechs is they get regular memory wipes because when you don't, they, these droids end up building up these like they develop personalities and they may not be like best suited for their functions and the like.
Right.
It really
Right.
served R2D2 well over the years. He's become loyal. He's not just a the artificial AI that we all have on our phones now. Here, it is someone who's looking out for the people he serves. And you see at the end of this episode how desperate he is to get the Jedi's attention and go do something for Anakin and Mace and all this. I don't know. I think you're right. I think there's a little bit of a level of attachment for Anakin with Anakin and R2. I think it was much more on display in the Droid Lost arc, when we had Goldie and all that from season 1 than it is here, where you're like this episode, it's much more about Anakin's faith in R2D2.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
here it's that, he's been through the wars with R2. Mace Windu's putting his trust in the other Jedi. Mace Windu's putting his trust in the clones and people that he's worked with. R8, his droid, really is just kind of like, they don't have any affection there because they just don't have those similar experiences that Anakin has.
Right.
I don't, I'm sure that droid probably was with it Mace on that ship in some battle, but Mace was an adult when that happened. He wasn't the kid that Anakin was on there,
Mhm.
which now that we're talking about it is perhaps one of the reasons why the Jedi do take these kids so young that they don't necessarily form these attachments. It worked out here, but it really drove Anakin towards doing things that were outside the scope of his orders in that earlier story arc. And we've seen it time and time again with him is that he can't put those type of attachments aside.
Right. And let's not forget too that there's another reason why Anakin is so enamored or attached, if you will, to R2. It's because it was Padme's droid.
Yeah.
And, the story is that when they got married, they kind of exchanged droids. So realistically, now that C-3PO is in Padme's service, R2 is in Anakin's service, so there's that added element there as well in that personal connection.
Yeah. You know what's funny about that though is, I've heard a lot of people say that, that this was one of the reasons why he's so attached to R2 is because it was Padme's droid. Well, she had 5 droids on that ship, and this is just the one that happened survived. I mean, it could have
Mhm.
been it could have been an R5 droid that, suddenly we got attached to. And yes, she cleaned up R2D2, and she was doing that as a way to spy on everybody else, the Jedi and that were on that ship, so she could figure out what was going on without revealing who she was. And that droid came to be more important to her. It was in her service after that, and it was a prominent droid and stuff like that. But it's not quite the beginnings that Anakin had with 3PO. As you pointed out,
Mhm.
Anakin built 3PO. He was lonely. And when he leaves 3PO, it's like, you've been a great pal. I'll make sure mom doesn't sell you, type of a
Right.
conversation. We don't ever really see communications like that between Padme and R2D2. It
Mhm.
is, it's the Sabe, impersonating the queen. It's like, this droid deserves our thanks. Padme, clean it up. And, that's kind of what we saw before. Not quite the same level of affection. But again, that doesn't make it any less sentimental for Anakin.
Sure.
Just like Padme holding on to his old Padawan braid and the
Right.
divorce at the, so
Right, which is so, so sweet. One other point I wanted to make real quick, because I know we're going long on this particular aspect of things, is just it reminded me also from Attack of the Clones when Padme and Anakin go undercover, and they're each talking about a little bit of their insecurities, and Anakin said, "This is my first mission on my own as a Jedi. I'm a little anxious too." And then he says, "But it's okay. We
yeah,
have R2 with us."
right. That's a good call out. It's a
So
really good
it's
call out. Yeah.
yeah, so I mean, there is that, he always had his faith in R2.
Well, and now that you pointed out, it's like the only other people that really know about now they're not even people, but the only others that know about Anakin and Padme being married are 3PO and R2D2, plus the
Mhm.
holy person that married them. Otherwise, it's
Right.
pretty much a secret to the rest of the galaxy. So, yeah, I mean, he is definitely the analogy to Anakin being or 3PO. The analogy to R2 being the family dog becomes more and more apt the more we discuss it here. I mean, he really is part of the family at this
Sure.
point. He's trusted with a secret the way 3PO is that precious few have been entrusted.
Right.
So,
And the fact that R2 becomes so distraught in making sure that he does in fact deliver Anakin's message and that he does help him
yeah.
just lends so much more personality to him as well.
Yeah. Well, before we move on to another topic or more of this episode, definitely go watch the featurette on StarWars.com with Dave Filoni because it
Yes.
just has so many great clips of R2 doing R2 things from all
Yes.
the movies there. And it was, you got R2 shrieking and running into the walls and Revenge of the Sith, and then, trying to look into Yoda's hut and The Empire Strikes Back. So many great little scenes there. So definitely worth
Mhm.
checking out. The thing is, like, I was talking about Mace Windu here, and it had been a long time since I seen this episode. And I've been on record on this podcast standing up for Mace and the way that he kind of treats everyone, despite the fact that he wasn't as nice to Ahsoka as he could be in later seasons of the Clone Wars. But then I was like, oh, I forgot about this altogether. The way he's just talking to Anakin about
Mhm.
R2D2. But then at the very end, when he called R2D2 over and said, hey, droid, I can see why your master has such faith in you. Good job. It's like, thank you for giving us at least that little crumb of
Yes.
redemption here.
Yeah.
Um, because how did you feel about that portrayal? I kind of felt like this wasn't quite the same Mace we've seen in the past couple episodes.
Yeah, well, I think some of it is when you're faced with the idea that you may not make it out of a situation, it causes you to pause and to really, reflect with a little bit of time that he had in terms of, where is he focusing his energies? You know what I mean? I mean, Mace has always kind of been wary of Anakin's emotional intensity, his impulsiveness, his unconventional behavior. So, I mean, these have always sort of been these root causes of tension between the two of them. But and I think too with Mace reflecting on, finding the other half of Jango Fett's helmet and sitting there and So Mace was so much more reflective, I think, at this point, especially when he had that half helmet of Jango's,
Hmm.
because he's normally so detached from everything. I mean, he knew who Jango was, obviously. He knew what he was doing in the arena and who he had killed. But for him to come literally face to face with that memory, I think it kind of softened him a little bit. And
Hmm.
at least in this particular episode, normally he's very rigid and stoic, and he displayed a lot more adaptability and even, humor at some points in time. Not much, but more so than we notice him at any other time. So it's a different depth for him, for sure.
Yeah, I kind of feel like there was two Maces in this episode. And if you think back, the last couple of episodes he featured with Anakin in the Zilla Beast, a little
Mhm,
two-parter that we got, and he was very empathetic and very conscientious of everything that was going on with the Zilla Beast. And then, and when it comes to this episode, he was just kind of cold. I think with Anakin and R2 at the beginning of this, and I really felt like those two had developed a bond over the previous episode, not an attachment, but some sort of a bond.
mhm,
And but then it wasn't until they're trapped under the debris, and he uses the Force to pull over that part of Jango's helmet, and he looks at it, and he starts telling Anakin the story about, oh, that's Boba Fett. That was the son or the clone that Jango regarded as a son that I killed on Geonosis. And
mhm.
so, there was some, yeah, very reflective in that moment. But when I was asking the question about, is this Mace consistent? I think my question, I think, was more like coming from the perspective of, I'm not sure the way he was engaging with Anakin in this episode was as consistent with what we'd seen in the previous few episodes.
Mhm.
But, I'm not saying he was disrespecting Anakin, but he seemed a whole lot more warmer towards him. And I would not have expected that guy, who saw R2D2 save the Chancellor, from the
Yeah.
Zillo Beast, and there to be so dismissive of R2D2 here, in this case, and to be kind of it was like in the previous episode where he was kind of ribbing Anakin in the way that only Mace Windu can about, you're just upset that you didn't get your chance to show off for those cadets,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
And in this
Mhm.
case, it's just like, your droid's kind of jittery, and you seem to have an awful lot of undue faith in this droid. And yeah, I get it. They got multiple writers for the show and a lot of different people writing these episodes, but it just doesn't seem to be necessarily the same Mace Windu I would have expected,
Mhm.
from what we'd seen the last couple weeks.
No, I think that's fair, and I think maybe some of that too comes from the fact that he doesn't want to accept this relationship that Anakin has with R2 because he doesn't understand it. So I'm
Right.
wondering if he pulls back a little bit from that just because of that reason? You know what I mean?
Yeah. 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 Well, at the end though, it's like almost like he sees the error of his ways. Come here, droid. I can see why your master's got faith in you. Good job.
Right.
Um, okay. Well, let's talk a bit about the bounty hunters here. I thought it was interesting, kind of the way they introduced them, which was we didn't see them until after the Boba's trap had been set off. Anakin walks up, sees the helmets, like, what's this? What? It doesn't make any sense to be a Mandalorian helmet there. And as an aside, that was really well done. Why would Anakin know anything about that? It was Obi-Wan that chased down Jango Fett. And then it
Mhm.
was Mace that confronted Jango in the arena. And sure, maybe someone would have talked about it, but he would not have had, it would have been something that was necessary at the forefront of his mind compared to those other two. Anyway, nice touch there. And, it was suddenly when, Mace is like, oh, Anakin, don't, and pulled him over out of the full brunt of the explosion to save him. But that's when we get introduced to the bounty hunters in this episode. I mean, we remember them from the last episode, but it was just, I don't know, I don't want to overstate it, but it was kind of a neat reveal in this regard because they were there to look for survivors after this ship had crashed. It wasn't so much that the bounty hunters were still hanging around.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I see where you're going with all that. And as far as Mace is concerned as well in Anakin, I mean, Anakin did know of Django because obviously in Attack of the Clones, when they were trying to chase down the Claudite, they
Mhm.
saw Django fly away and they knew of him, even though Obi-Wan was the one that went to Camino to check out the whole thing.
Right.
So, but I think for Anakin, it was a big lure for him is, again, going back to Tatooine, and he's all about the artifacts, he's all about the things, and kind of like, what's this doing here? So his natural inclination is definitely to pick that up. But the bounty hunters themselves, I agree, it was a great way to integrate them into this episode. And also, once again, as we were talking about with the last episode, to show again that dynamic between Aura Singh and Boba and the true reason why she wants him around and what's at stake here, even though it was mainly Boba's idea to try to exact this revenge and then try
Hmm.
to get proof, Aura turned it around and tried to make it profitable too.
Yeah, that's an interesting dynamic that they've got between those two, which is kind of a, Aura is like the evil conscience, the little devil over Boba's shoulder that we've seen in
Hmm.
the last episode and this episode, which is, okay, you got your revenge. There's no way anyone could have assigned the explosion. Let's go. But Boba's insistent. I want to make sure they're dead. And then when Aura Singh sees that he's not going to budge on that, and you've got the Costas, the Barada
Hmm.
type alien there, who's like, oh, I don't like this. I want to leave. Totally figures out a way to turn this around. Like, okay, Boba's not going to leave, so now I got to support him because for whatever reason, she's, as you pointed out, she's desperately wants to kind of keep Boba in line. There's something there that she wants to get out of him, whether it's the ship or whatever else. And I don't know. I'm not entirely sure what it is that Aura sees in Boba that she's so interested in, and
Hmm.
keeping him in line and kind of corrupting him to her way of doing things.
Well, again, he's a tool
Yeah.
and to her. And as we were saying in the last episode, he has certain advantages that other people don't. In the fact that he, if she's trying to infiltrate different places, he looks like all the other clones, obviously. So he can get into places that they can't. And he's definitely valuable to her in a lot of ways. I mean, even to the point where when Castus is giving Boba a hard deal, she pulls right up with her blaster and says, "Oh, don't do that. Like, don't
Yeah.
even." And so she was the first one to quote unquote protect him, but of course for her own ends.
Yeah. I also can't help but wonder if it isn't just something like when we got to the Book of Boba Fett and Jango or Cad Bane shows up, and it was just kind of a way of all these bounty hunters like measuring themselves up against the guy that was widely regarded as the best bounty hunter in the galaxy. That was Jango, and now
Mhm.
here's the next
Mhm.
best thing.
Mhm.
And so I wonder if there isn't something about that. There is, to as you're suggesting, I suppose, some prestige to being with Boba in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And it could be Slave One too. I mean, it could be his ship all along because it is a darn cool ship. That's for
that
sure.
is that is for certain. That's right. What did you think about the Gundarks?
Oh my gosh. Like I forgot how gruesome they are. I mean, they're walking gargoyles
Yeah.
and they're just kind of the stuff of nightmares. And in my brain when I was thinking about them, I was translating there into Minox and I was like, "Wait, no, these are definitely not the same thing.
All
These
right.
things are huge and they're nasty." And yeah, just like galactic gargoyles. There you go.
Yeah. You know, they don't look so bad. It looks like you pull the ears off a Gundar. That's the line we got from The
Right.
Empire Strikes Back that launched
Yeah.
the mythology around these creatures. Now we got to see the Gundarks in season one when Anakin and Obi-Wan were going through that cave when they were trying to find Count Dooku. But they're back here again. So, you know, I guess it's like some of the other creatures. You find Gundarks all over the galaxy. They
Mhm.
don't seem to be native to any one particular world. But I I really enjoy the scenes with R2 in them. The poor R8 gets destroyed by one of the Gundarks, and then the two Gundarks fight over R8's remains. And then, R2D2 gets away from the one, and then as he gets cornered, he sacrifices Anakin's ship. He attaches a suction cup to the one Gundark's head and then to the ship,
Yeah.
and then triggers it. The ship goes flying off and explodes. I mean, R2's not messing around when it
No,
comes
he
to this
really
thing.
isn't. Well, I mean, like we said, this is Anakin on the line here. And, R2 is the loyal dog, and he's going to do everything he can to protect his master. And that was
And
part of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I thought too about the Gundarks thing with Obi-Wan and Anakin where they were talking about, "I rescued you from that nest of Gundarks."
Hmm.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
saving your skin for the ninth time, 10th time.
Ninth time that business on Cato Dynamite didn't count. Okay.
Nice.
Well, yeah, just the other one thing that we kind of talked about a little bit, but just I loved R2's arrival on Coruscant. He just evaded the bounty hunters. Actually, there's one other thing that I want to get to first. So the bounty hunters are on Jango's ship and they are chasing R2D2 because they believe it's Mace Windu that's in that
Mhm,
ship. And they want to
mhm.
try and get him before he gets away. I get it. It's a Jedi fighting that ship. But what did they just show us in the previous episode? Boba Fett was a crack shot. He took out every target with one shot. And how many shots did he take at that ship? And only succeeded in knocking off the one communications array on the thing.
Yeah.
So, look, I mean, I don't want to get caught up in necessarily the consistencies because we're talking about storytelling here. But they went out of their way to show us how good a shot Boba Fett is, and the purpose of that in that prior episode was to set him apart, so that before they told us it was Boba Fett, we knew there was something special about this clone that the rest of them didn't have, and so
Mhm.
it was a narrative clue. And in this case, it was though. But he just told us how good he was at hitting things and moving targets, and there is a droid flying this ship, just like those other targets were supposed to mimic droids, and he can't hit it.
I think this is a lot more emotionally charged for him, though, you know what I mean? Even though he should be just as good with any target. He
Uh-huh.
was almost, I guess, desperate at this point. If I'm gonna make excuses for Boba, I guess that's the best one I can do.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind, and sometimes I think we just have to chalk it up to storytelling when it comes down
Right.
to it. But
Yeah.
like I said, I don't think Dave Filoni and George Lucas intended for us to look at that detail in that regard. He is just as, a deadly a bounty hunter as ever, even he didn't make that one shot. And then he just picked the wrong hyperspace ring to blow up before
Mhm.
R2 docked with one and got off to Coruscant, which gets me back to what I was bringing up before. So he gets to Coruscant, you know, jettisons himself from the ship, goes tearing through the Jedi temple. He could have gone around those two astromech
I know,
droids.
I was thinking that too.
But he chose to plow right through them before finding Ahsoka and Plo Koon and getting a little slapping fight with that other astromech
Oh, so great.
droid. Yeah.
Well,
Goodness.
the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, so
Yeah.
had to crash through those droids.
But but I love it that, Ahsoka vouched for him and then Plo Koon said, "Up, all right, off we go. We'll take my ship." And and they did, and they went. So
Yes.
nice little tidy conclusion to this episode.
Yes, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. Well, there's a couple other things here I wanted to bring up before we conclude. One, again, just thinking about the relationship between Anakin and R2, going back to Revenge of the Sith when they are on the Invisible Hand and they get trapped in the ray shields,
Hmm.
and then Anakin says, "Don't worry, R2 will be along shortly." Patience, master, patience. And then he even in the elevator earlier, he's talking about R2 and he gets right up in Obi-Wan's face. He's like, no loose wire jokes. And Obi-Wan's like, what did I say? I didn't say anything. So again, it's just illustrating further that relationship that they have with each other, R2 has with Anakin and vice versa. And then I thought it was very foreshadowing when they were being transported, Mace and Anakin were being transported back to the temple, and they were on those litters, those gurneys,
Hmm.
and Ahsoka says, "You've got some serious burns, Master, but nothing that, good night in the bacta tank won't cure." But it's like, serious burns, huh? That ain't nothing compared to what you gonna get in the future, honey.
That's
Sorry to
right.
tell you.
Yeah.
Sorry to tell
Indeed.
you.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. Okay. Well then, anything else before wrapping up?
I think that was it for me. Anything else for you?
No, no, a good episode. Like I said, it's not bad. It's just that I think for me, compared to what precedes it and what follows it, it's the weaker of the three, but still a good episode. Obviously, you could see how much we had to talk about it, which is more than usual when it comes to Clone Wars. So, All right. Well, with that, thank you all for joining us for the episode of Podcast Stardust and our discussion of the Clone Wars. We hope you enjoyed it. And thank you for subscribing to the show. And if you haven't done that already, hey, do it. Make sure you get all of our Clone Wars discussions. And we'd also appreciate your ratings and review on whatever podcatcher that you use that supports such things. And if you want to find more episodes of the show beyond what you're likely to find on your podcatcher, head over to retrozapp.com. The entire catalog of shows, including all previous 938 of them, can be found there. And a bunch of other great shows that are on the network as well. But with those things having said, Jay, I want to remind everybody what our social media contacts are again and where else we can find online.
Sure thing. So, no communications jamming here. We are on Facebook and Instagram conveniently at Podcast Stardust. And you can also find us on YouTube and YouTube Music. So, please let us know what you thought of this episode of The Clone Wars, as well as all of our other episodes. And we sure hope that you'll subscribe to those channels as well. And then we do have our Pinterest page, our Pinterest account page that has all of our different boards for everything Star Wars. So please go check that out. And then we also have our TeePublic store. So if you would like to snag some Podcast Artist merch, you can head to the link in our show notes and pick up all kinds of things with one of 7 different show logo designs on it. So you can get apparel, home goods, and everything else in between.
Okay, upcoming on the show on Wednesday, Jay is bringing us the next edition of World Between Worlds, where she wraps up Star Wars lifestyle and fashion products and lets us know about them. And then on Friday, we are wrapping up the week, as we usually do, with another look at Star Wars news. With that having been said, thanks for listening to episode 939 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great week, and until next time, may the Force be with you.